Starting in April of 2024, I predicted in a series of articles and videos that the likelihood of a war between Israel and Iran would be increasing significantly as 2024 went by. And then later in 2024, I predicted that a war was actually quite likely at some point in late 2024 or at some point during the year in 2025. A major war between Iran and Israel has definitely started. And so in that respect, that part of my prediction has been right. But there was another even more important part of my prediction, which was that I assessed that in the event of a war between Israel and Iran, there would be a pretty high probability that Iran would resort to blocking commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is really important because in terms of the importance to the global economy and financial markets, the significance of an Iran-Israel war is really in this possibility that the Strait of Hormuz could be blocked. If there is no blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, then this war won't be particularly significant in terms of the global economy or global stock markets. Now, in my previous video, I reviewed why and under what circumstances Iran might want to resort to blocking the passage of commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And what I discussed in this video is that Iran would likely only resort to this as a sort of desperate last-ditch effort to preserve its own regime. Now, in this video, what we're going to discuss is exactly how Iran might be able to actually pull this off. A lot of people are skeptical about whether or not Iran actually has the capability to block the Strait of Hormuz. So in this video, I'm going to review a previous video or a portion of a video that I published about 11 months ago, where I went into great detail regarding the capabilities of Iran to actually block the Strait of Hormuz and to do so in a sustained fashion. After we watch this clip about the capacity of Iran to sustain a blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to talk about what it is that you need to be doing as an investor in order to prepare your portfolio for this.
Due to its unique geographical position and its very deliberate military preparations over the course of over a decade, Iran has the capacity to block the passage of almost all commercial traffic that attempts to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. This is critically important because roughly 20% of the entire world's oil supply, coming from countries such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran itself, passes through this extremely narrow strait. This 20% of the world's oil supply that passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day is mainly exported to Asia and Europe, with some relatively small sales to Africa, Latin America, and the United States. And the thing that's geostrategically and economically very unique about the Strait of Hormuz is that there are virtually no alternatives for exporting this 20% of the global oil supply by means of any other route except through this very narrow strait. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is about 21 miles wide. However, the shipping lanes that are navigable for large commercial vessels are only about 2 miles going into the strait and 2 miles coming out of the strait. Roughly 100 large vessels have to pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. About 20 to 30% of those are oil tankers. A lot of smaller vessels also have to navigate around and through this very tricky area. So in this area, there usually congregates dozens, even hundreds of ships that form a sort of traffic jam that are waiting to get through the Strait of Hormuz. In order for you to understand the geostrategic importance of this area, you need to form a mental picture of the fact that there are literally hundreds of vessels all the way up and down the Persian Gulf, north and south, that are lined up and that converge at this choke point. Now, all of these ships that are lined up all the way up and down the Persian Gulf are like sitting ducks to any hostile power that were determined to stop the flow of oil from coming out of the Persian Gulf. And it's not just at the choke point where ships are vulnerable. Remember, all up and down the Persian Gulf, these ships are lined up like ducks in a row. Iran is keenly aware of the geostrategic importance of this region and of the vulnerability of shipping. And they've been preparing themselves for over 2 decades militarily in order to be able to block all commercial traffic in the Persian Gulf at the time of their choosing if they believe it's in their national interest to do so. What would be the significance of disrupting oil flows that come out of the Persian Gulf? As a reminder, in 1973, during the Arab oil embargo, roughly 4% of the global oil supply was disrupted for a period of around 3 months. 20% of the global oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz. In other words, a disruption of the Strait of Hormuz would create a disruption in global oil supplies that would be many times greater than what happened during the Arab oil embargo in 1973. What happened in 1973 as a result of this disruption? Global oil prices quadrupled. This kicked off a wave of inflation and some very painful and long recessions all over the world. Something like that could happen if oil supplies were disrupted coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, exactly why and under what circumstances Iran might do this is something that I'm going to address later in this video. For now, it's simply important to know that Iran has for many years been putting itself into a position where it can militarily accomplish this task. And it has publicly threatened that it will do this under certain circumstances. So here's the question. Does Iran have the capacity to severely disrupt or even totally block commercial traffic from coming in or out of the Persian Gulf for a significant period of time? The answer to this question is yes. Now, I've noticed in quite a few other articles and videos of mine where I've touched on this subject, a lot of people have been very surprised, and some people have even been skeptical about the ability of Iran to disrupt traffic through the Persian Gulf, particularly given the geostrategic importance of this region for the rest of the world and the great amount of military might and naval power that's been concentrated in this area precisely in order to protect the passage of commercial vessels in and out of the Persian Gulf. So I'm going to provide some nitty-gritty details in order to support my assessment of the situation. The first set of evidence, which for me is the most convincing, that Iran will be able to block traffic in and out of the Persian Gulf if it so chooses, has been the tremendous success that the Houthis of Yemen have had in blocking commercial traffic in and out of the Red Sea. Commercial traffic through the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal, which are the 2 choke points coming in and out of the Red Sea, have declined by 70% as a result of Houthi actions. Now, what's truly remarkable about this success that the Houthis have had is that there is a 20-nation coalition led by the United States, a major naval operation that's there precisely to try to protect commercial traffic in and out of the Red Sea. And evidently, this effort has failed because traffic has actually declined by 70%. So the success of the Houthis, who are supported, armed, and trained by Iran, provides a perfect case study for understanding how it is that the Iranians will be successful if they try to block traffic in the Persian Gulf. What the Houthis have shown is that you don't need a big navy or a big air force to directly confront the United States and its military allies. What you need are guerrilla-type tactics and certain limited types of technology which will enable you to directly attack commercial shipping strategic moments and in strategic places. All the navies in the world do not have the combined force necessary to escort every single commercial vessel that's coming in and out of the Red Sea. So the Houthis don't confront the naval forces directly. They go after the virtually unprotected and relatively unarmed commercial vessels. And in those encounters with commercial vessels where they've been able to apply these asymmetric tactics and where they have a tactical advantage, they've had tremendous success. They've been able to board these ships and basically kidnap the crews and commandeer these ships. They've been able to sink ships with missiles. They've been able to attack them with drones. They have come at these ships from a variety of angles, and they've proven that they can be successful. And for this reason, insurers have simply said, we're no longer going to insure traffic through here. And the commercial shippers have said, we're no longer going to put our ships at risk, our cargo at risk, and our crews at risk. So what the Houthis have shown is that by posing a credible threat, by simply sinking or otherwise damaging less than 1% of the commercial vessels that are going through the region, they've been able to halt 70% of the traffic. This is a very key insight, because unless the United States and its allies are able to provide a practically 100% guarantee that hostile forces won't attack commercial shipping simply won't go through these affected areas. And the fact of the matter is that the United States and its allies cannot make that promise. They can't deliver on that sort of a promise. So what you need to understand here is that in order for the Houthis to win, they don't need to confront the U.S. Navy and its allies directly and win naval battles or aerial battles. Whenever there's a direct confrontation, they're generally going to lose. And so they're not looking to confront the U.S. Navy and allied forces directly. They're looking to avoid those confrontations and to simply confront the relatively defenseless and unarmed commercial ships. And when they do that, they not only win the tactical battle, they win the strategic battle. Because their strategic objective is not really to sink U.S. Navy ships or down U.S. airplanes. Their strategic objective is to severely disrupt commercial traffic in and out of the Red Sea. And measured by that strategic standard, they've succeeded. So the Houthis, with Iranian tactical advice, with Iranian weapons, with Iranian technology, have managed to achieve their strategic objectives. And these are exactly the same objectives that Iran would have if it decides to disrupt traffic in the Persian Gulf. Based on the fact that the Iranians are far more powerful, have far better technology, have far better geographic advantages, why wouldn't we expect the Iranians to have the same type of success or even more success than the Houthis have had in the Red Sea? So let's talk about Iran's advantages. And you're going to be able to see that they're vastly superior to the Houthis. First and foremost is geographic. The Iranians have 1,100 miles of coastline that dominate the north and northeastern shore of the Persian Gulf. That means that from land, they don't have to operate from the sea the way the U.S. Navy does. They have 1,100 miles of coastline that they know well, where they can deploy mobile missile launchers all along that coast in order to shoot missiles with a range long enough that it can reach any ship in the Persian Gulf with accuracy. They can shoot cruise missiles from there. They can send out swarms of drones from there. Iran is one of the largest producers of drones in the world. They also have developed over the years a significant military infrastructure with hardened and deep silos from which they can launch missiles. The Iranian coastline features a lot of little small islands and coves which they can use to launch suicide speedboats and manned speedboats directed at commercial traffic. It's pretty much overwhelming the staging grounds that they have to be able to attack commercial traffic. And the U.S. military simply cannot patrol that entire 1,100-mile coastline. Because they own that coastline, they can rapidly deploy forces from inland protected areas. They can sustain operations without the need for long supply lines. They're also able to quickly withdraw forces into the inland areas if they're actually attacked, which is actually a huge advantage. Now let's talk a little bit about Iranian technology, and in particular naval technology. For example, the Iranians have a pretty large fleet of midget submarines, the Ghadir class, which are submarines that can attack commercial shipping. They also have a class of small submarines that specialize in laying some of the most sophisticated types of mines. Something that is little known and hasn't been really talked about enough is that the Iranians have the capacity through their submarines and other vessels to lay thousands of mines that would make the whole Persian Gulf unsafe for shipping, and that even under the very best of circumstances would take the U.S. Navy many, many months to clear. The Iranians have thousands of different types of anti-ship missiles that they've either acquired directly from China or from Russia, or that they've reverse engineered. The Iranians have the Jask-2, which is a submarine-launched cruise missile. They have missiles with ranges 100 to 300 miles. That's more than enough to cover the entire width of the Persian Gulf. The Iranians even have hypersonic missiles, which U.S. naval vessels don't even have a good answer for. Now, some people might say, all these missiles that you're talking about, look, Iran sent all these missiles to Israel, and Israel was able to intercept almost all of them. But that's missing the point. Iran would be shooting these missiles at commercial vessels that are practically defenseless against any sort of missile. Not even U.S. Navy ships can be complacent. According to several defense analysts that I've read in recent months, the U.S. military believes that Iran may actually be capable of taking out a U.S. aircraft carrier. Aircraft carriers have the most sophisticated defensive systems, and the Iranians may very well be able to penetrate those defenses on an aircraft carrier. They will probably be able to penetrate defenses on lesser naval vehicles. But when you think about what Iran can do against commercial vessels, it's a joke. They can blow commercial vessels out of the water. These are like sitting ducks. So let's remember the lessons from the Houthi experience and apply it to what would be happening in the Persian Gulf. The reality is that Iran does not need to take out any U.S. naval vessels. The only thing that Iran needs to do is to perhaps take out a few commercial vessels and thereby establish credibility. And what that means is that virtually no maritime insurance company will insure a commercial vessel that's transiting through the Persian Gulf. It means that no commercial shipper will actually send their ships through the Persian Gulf. In fact, the only thing that Iran has to do is simply announce that any commercial vessel that passes through the Persian Gulf, they will attack it and they will sink it. And simply by virtue of that threat, virtually no commercial shipping company will send its ships through the Persian Gulf. And no insurance company will insure ships. And simply by means of this threat, Iran would achieve its strategic objective, which is simply to disrupt most or all commercial traffic through the Persian Gulf, and in particular, to disrupt traffic of oil through that region. Remember, 20% of the global oil supply transits through the Persian Gulf and has to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. For reasons I've described here, I believe that Iran has the capacity to disrupt practically 100% of all oil traffic coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. But even if it was only able to disrupt 50% of the traffic, that would still be a disruption that was much greater than the disruption of the oil supplies during the Arab oil embargo of 1973. And remember that at that particular point in time, the oil price quadrupled.
So now we're coming to the part of the video where we need to talk about what it is that investors need to be doing in order to prepare their portfolios and protect their capital or potentially take advantage of this situation. And there's essentially two broad types of strategies that investors should be considering here. The first strategy is simply one that's defensive. And the second strategy is one that's much more aggressive. So let's start talking about the defensive strategies. If you have a lot of risk in your portfolio, if you have a pretty large allocation to equities, now is a good time to be reviewing your holdings to look at stocks that might be expensive, stocks that may not really have a lot of fundamental value, or funds that might be overly exposed to the S&P 500, which right now is at almost record high valuations, and kind of pare down the risk in those portfolios. And depending on how aggressive you want to be, you can either bring that risk exposure down to zero, or you can simply reduce it so that that exposure that you do have, you will be willing to absorb it and not, let's say, get too panicked or scared if the market is down by 20, 30, or even 40%. Now, for those of you that are a little bit more aggressive and want to look at how you can actually capitalize on this opportunity, particularly the downside aspect of it, then there's some strategies that you can try to implement. Now, the easiest strategy is simply to sidestep this. In other words, if you go to cash and the market falls, you'll be able to buy stocks and funds a lot cheaper. That's actually the safest and most conservative way to try to play this if you actually think that the Strait of Hormuz is going to be blocked and that the market is going to have a pretty big decline as a result. Now, an even more aggressive way to play this is that there's ways that you can gain what I call bearish exposure to the market by either shorting specific stocks that you might think have weak fundamentals and might be overvalued, or you can actually buy ETFs that provide bearish exposure for you. They're called inverse ETFs. And then there's an even more aggressive type of strategy that you can implement if you know how to trade options, which is to buy put options or potentially to buy call options on an index such as the VIX. Now, I personally have two different types of portfolios. In one of my portfolios and in one of my portfolio services called Successful Portfolio Strategy, which is on the Seeking Alpha marketplace, I have a pretty conservatively run portfolio where I do a little bit of a more conservative approach where I actually do gain some bearish exposure to the market through some inverse ETFs and by holding stocks in sectors that I think would benefit from this scenario, such as the energy sector, and by holding some ETFs that actually hold crude oil futures. And I also do some other things in that portfolio. So I would call this a semi-aggressive way to take advantage of this potential situation that we're going to be going through here. And then I have a much more aggressive service that I offer that's called the Crisis Opportunity Portfolio, and you can find that on investораcumen.com. And in this portfolio, I trade options. I trade all kinds of things, but I primarily trade options in this portfolio, which enable us to make gains of over 100% over a certain period of time if we happen to be right on this thesis. Now, obviously, this portfolio is a lot more risky, but the returns can be pretty spectacular if the thesis turns out to be correct. So whatever you decide to do, the most important thing that you need to do is you need to get active in managing your portfolio. This is not a time to be sitting there buying and holding and just hoping for the best. You need to manage your risk here in order to avoid yourself getting in a situation where your wealth can get really hit, and also where you can potentially capitalize on the situation by at least holding some cash and you can buy stocks at a cheaper price later on. And I also strongly recommend that you all check out my two services, because there you're going to be able to see in an expert fashion how you can actually manage your portfolio in a way that'll allow you to really take advantage of this situation in a maximal way. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.